Hello everyone, welcome back to the YouTube channel. Today we're diving into one of the most surprising, overlooked, and genuinely dramatic innovations of World War II, an innovation that didn't come from a laboratory, a university engineering department, or a high-ranking Admiralty planning committee, but rather from one practical, stubborn, slightly maverick Royal Navy officer who refused to accept that the standard way of doing things was good enough. His idea was described as insane by some of the very people who eventually adopted it. But the results? It doubled the kill rate against German U-boats almost overnight. This is the story of how one officer's relentless push for a new pattern of depth charge attack changed the Battle of the Atlantic, saved countless merchant ships, and gave the Allies a crucial edge at a time when the war could very easily have gone the other way. To understand why this mattered, we need to set the stage. For Americans today, looking back at the Battle of the Atlantic often means imagining long gray convoys, Liberty ships punching through rough waters, U-boats lurking in the darkness, and escort ships racing to defend the lifeline between the United States and Great Britain. What can be easy to forget is just how close the Allies came to losing control of that lifeline. In early 1942, right when the United States entered the war, German U-boats were celebrating what they called the second happy time. American coastal shipping was being ravaged. Tankers were burning off the East Coast. The British were already strained. Without the ability to bring men and material across the Atlantic, no invasion of North Africa, Italy, or France would ever have been possible. So anything that improved U-boat hunting wasn't a trivial technical tweak. It was a matter of survival. Yet, for most of the early war, the technology of submarine hunting lagged far behind the threat. Active sonar, called ASDIC by the British, could detect submarines, but not very reliably. It lost contact easily. It struggled in rough seas. The underwater environment distorted and bounced signals unpredictably. And even when a ship did detect a submarine, actually destroying it was shockingly difficult. Convoy escort ships often carried dozens of depth charges, but they burned through them quickly because most attacks resulted in no confirmed kills. German submarines exploited deep layers of cold water, practiced extreme evasive maneuvers, and often slipped away simply because the standard Allied attack pattern assumed they were in the wrong place. In other words, the Allies were hunting with guesswork, and the guesswork wasn't good enough. Enter Lieutenant Commander Johnny Walker of the Royal Navy. Walker was one of those officers whose reputation seemed to be built on a contradiction. He was both deeply traditional and wildly innovative. A lifelong Navy man, he loved ships, seamanship, and the rituals of the service. But he also had a fiercely analytical mind and an almost obsessive interest in anti-submarine warfare. Before the war, while many officers jockeyed for glamorous destroyer or cruiser commands, Walker poured his energy into studying sonar reports, experimenting with tactics, sketching ideas for new depth charge patterns, and drilling crews in maneuvers that most officers considered arcane or unnecessary. He had no problem bucking the system if he believed the system was wrong. His obsession made some people uneasy. But it also made him the perfect man for the crisis the Allies were facing. Depth charges, by 1940, were still simple weapons, steel barrels filled with explosives, designed to detonate at a preset depth. Ships launched them from racks at the stern or from side throwers that created a wider pattern. The conventional attack method assumed the submarine was directly ahead of the attacking ship and slightly below. Escorts would race forward at high speed, try to maintain sonar contact, and drop charges in a rough diamond pattern. The problem wasn't just drift, noisy screws, and lost sonar contact. It was also that submarines were not sitting still. A U-boat commander wasn't simply waiting to be hit. He was turning, diving, climbing in the water column, or launching deceptive maneuvers designed to make escorts overshoot or drop charges too far away. Again and again, depth charge attacks ended with the same frustrating results: explosions, rising foam, then silence. Occasionally oil or debris, but usually nothing. Escort captains would mark the attack as possibly damaged, or probably escaped. Meanwhile, the U-boat would slip away to attack again. Walker believed the answer was not simply drop more charges. It was drop charges where the submarine actually will be, not where outdated doctrine assumes it is. And that required a radical rethinking of the entire spread of explosives in the water. His idea came from studying countless sonar traces, post-attack reports, and captured German data. He noticed that German U-boats almost never maintained a straight escape path. When detected, the routine German tactic was to execute a hard turn, often toward the attacking ship. Why toward it? Because turning away exposed the U-boat's broadside to sonar. Turning toward the noise of the escort's screws produced a smaller sonar target and created confusing echoes. This meant that an escort attacking a U-boat was almost always dropping depth charges behind the submarine, because the sub had already cut inside the escort's turning radius. Walker designed what he called the creeping attack, and at the heart of it was his new, insane, depth charge pattern. It worked like this. Instead of the attacking ship making a fast, loud charge toward the sonar contact, which alerted the submarine, the escort slowed to a near crawl and ceded sonar tracking to a second ship behind it. That second ship, further away, held the sonar contact quietly and fed constant updates over radio or signal. The lead ship moved forward silently, making only the minimum noise to maneuver. Meanwhile, Walker's new depth charge pattern was set not around the original contact point but ahead and slightly to the inside of the U-boat's most likely evasive turn. Where older doctrine assumed the submarine would continue forward, Walker assumed the opposite, and planned his charges accordingly. The pattern itself was unconventional. Instead of a diamond or simple spread, Walker staggered the charges so that they formed an oval that expanded ahead of the submarine's assumed track, effectively boxing in any last-second maneuver. It required extremely precise timing. Charges had to leave the throwers and stern rails at exact intervals. The ship had to maintain a specific low speed. Depth settings needed to anticipate not where the submarine had been, but where it would be after reacting to the slow-approaching escort. When Walker first briefed this attack style, including the new pattern, some senior officers scowled. One famously muttered, "Walker, this is insane. You're attacking where the submarine isn't." Walker calmly replied, "No, sir. I'm attacking where it will be." And then he proved it. Walker's group, eventually famous as the Second Escort Group, put the creeping attack into practice during convoy escorts and hunter-killer operations. Almost immediately, their success rate skyrocketed. Engagement after engagement ended not with ambiguous results, but with unmistakable confirmation: rising debris, oil slicks, shattered hull fragments. Walker's ships were not just driving U-boats away, they were destroying them. American officers who observed or later adopted the method were astonished. Many were used to the frustration of long-depth charge runs with no kills. The creeping attack felt almost like cheating. The numbers didn't lie. Walker's pattern and method produced results nearly double those of the standard Allied approach. As the war progressed and the U-boat threat peaked in 1943, the Allies needed every advantage. The creeping attack and the radical pattern behind it played a major role in shifting the momentum of the Atlantic War. But the tactic also required superb crew training. Depth charge timing had to be flawless. The helmsman needed to maintain slow, steady speed even while knowing a submarine was right below. The sonar operators on the trailing ship had to keep delicate contact for long periods. And all of this had to happen under the stress of war, ships pitching in the waves, the knowledge that a torpedo could be fired upward, and the ever-present risk that the submarine might surface and attempt a last-ditch attack. Walker drilled his crews relentlessly. American naval officers who later trained with his group described the operations almost like choreography, a ballet of steel and explosives. Sailors memorized the timing to the half-second. Thrower crews practiced blindly loading charges in darkness. Officers rehearsed hand signal communication for when radios had to remain silent. This wasn't improvisation, it was craft. There's a reason Walker is sometimes described in naval history as the man who turned anti-submarine warfare into both an art and a science. As the creeping attack spread throughout the Royal Navy and gradually into Allied forces, the U-boat fleet struggled to adapt. German submarine commanders complained bitterly in logs and reports that previously effective maneuvers no longer preserved their advantage. They reported escorts holding contact more effectively, approaching more quietly, and dropping charges in ways that felt almost anticipatory. Some U-boat captains believed the Allies had developed a new type of sonar. In reality, it was just better tactics, and better use of existing equipment. In the Atlantic, outcomes shifted quickly. Convoy losses dropped. U-boat losses rose. Although many other factors contributed to turning the tide, such as long-range patrol aircraft, code-breaking, radar improvements, and escort carriers. Walker's innovations were one of the essential pieces in a complex puzzle. And for American viewers, it's worth highlighting that these innovations didn't just save British supply lines. They protected American soldiers, American fuel shipments, American food supplies, and American war equipment making its way to Britain, Africa, and eventually to the beaches of Normandy. The creeping attack helped secure a logistical bridge that made Allied victory possible. Walker himself didn't become a household name. In the United States, most discussions of the naval war emphasize American destroyer groups, escort carriers, and the later technological dominance the Allies achieved. But within the naval community, Walker's contributions are legendary. Historians often say that while admirals strategized the Battle of the Atlantic, it was officers like Walker who won it. One engagement, one convoy, one destroyed U-boat at a time. The story becomes even more compelling when you realize that Walker wasn't a comfortable insider. His career before the war stalled because his ideas were considered too eccentric, too theoretical, too far removed from the traditional operations valued by senior leadership. He was passed over for promotion more than once. His obsession with anti-submarine warfare was regarded by some as a career dead end. But Walker never backed away from his belief that ASW would define the next naval war. He didn't get the flashy command he wanted until the crisis was so severe that the Admiralty suddenly needed someone exactly like him, an officer who could bring unorthodox thinking to an existential threat. The creeping attack would not be his only innovation. He also developed the barrage attack, using multiple ships diving across each other's paths, and he pushed his crews to maximize the effectiveness of the new Hedgehog forward-throwing bombs. But the radical depth charge pattern, the one people called insane, remains his most famous and consequential contribution. If you look at how navies hunt submarines today, you'll still find the conceptual DNA of Walker's idea: assume the submarine will maneuver, attack ahead of the target, coordinate between ships, and minimize noise during the final approach. Walker wasn't just adjusting a tactic, he was helping create an entirely new way of thinking about underwater warfare. His personal story ends with a bittersweet note. Exhausted from years of relentless operations, Walker died in 1944 at the age of only 48. He didn't live to see the final defeat of the U-boat fleet. But by then, his escort group had sunk more submarines than any other Allied unit in the war, and his methods had spread across Allied naval forces. Admirals who once dismissed him now praised him publicly. The man who was once considered eccentric was finally recognized as the most successful U-boat hunter of the entire conflict. For Americans who study the war, for anyone fascinated by naval history, or for viewers who simply appreciate the power of one person's determination, Walker's story carries a powerful message: innovation doesn't always come from the top. Sometimes it comes from someone willing to challenge the rulebook, willing to endure criticism, and willing to push a new idea because they know it works, even when no one else believes them. Walker's insane depth charge pattern wasn't just a trick of geometry or timing. It was a lesson in understanding the enemy, adapting faster than they could, and refusing to accept mediocrity when survival is on the line. And it stands today as one of the clearest examples of how a single tactical innovation can change the course of a global conflict. If you enjoyed this deep dive into naval history and want more stories like this, stories full of innovation, determination, and the human ingenuity behind wartime events, make sure to like, subscribe, and stick around for the next episode. There's always another hidden detail waiting to be uncovered.